Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Doing a little audio check. Good evening, people. Thank you for joining me on this very impromptu live stream. We're going to give it another couple of minutes before we start, because obviously it was scheduled to start at 10. So I'll use this time to do a bit of sound checking. I'm going to do the usual and just ask you to give me some feedback in the chat to let me know that you're able to hear me okay. I'm also going to probably be playing some video today as well, so if I could get some feedback about the quality of the video that I play through, that would be excellent as well. And then I kind of know that we're good to go from there. I'm hoping I don't get the same issue echo, and that's literally what I was about to ask. How is it now? If I know what causes the echo issue, it's showing my video, so if I go full screen, I think the echo will disappear. I think it's something to do with the video delay. I do need to sort that out. I will sort that out shortly, but at the moment I'm gonna have to switch. So if I switch like that, what's going on? Gwyd from London. Greetings all. Thank you for joining me. It's really nice to have everyone on the stream. I've switched it over to the other view now. Just give me a shout and let me know if that's sorted the echo out. Let me know if that's sorted the echo out. Let me know. I'll wait on a bit of feedback and then we'll get cracking. I think hopefully by the next minute or two we'll be able to actually start the content. Just want to make sure all the audio is sorted. And well, we're past 10 o'clock now as well, so we can start the content soon as well. Audio is working now, no echo. Thank you, Talia. Awesome. All right, so we're in a good place. We're in a good place. So the only other, actually no, we can just get started. I can do the other sound check when I get there eventually. So that's good. Okay. Let's get cracking. So obviously this news story is one that's not new. It's probably about 3 to 4 weeks old now. So yeah, I'm not gonna act like I'm one of the first people reporting this news. I was gonna cover it, then I wasn't gonna cover it, but then I thought actually it would be good to cover it. First of all, because I've already covered the Cleopatra topic, and I think that this news story is kind of a sign of the times. And in my view, it's a bit of a negative omen for the people who are at least the racists in Egypt. It's kind of coming to a head now. So just to give a bit of an overview, the story is Dutch museum banned from Egyptian dig after upset on music show. So I'm going to read this article, which will give everybody a bit of background into the story, although I'm sure most people who are on this stream are aware of it already. But I think one of the most poignant things that's actually stood out to me about this story is the levels of desperation that we're getting to now. And I think, if I'm going to be totally frank, I kind of think that the Egyptian antiquities, and I'm not going to say all Egyptians, because I don't think this is reflective of how all Egyptians feel. I think there's a kind of a very vocal racially motivated contingent in Egypt that are very kind of, are very ardent in separating themselves from the rest of Africa. And I think they're the ones who are really just showing their arse at the moment. I think they're actually making they're making idiots of themselves, I'm going to be totally honest with you. And this article is going to show that. And I think it's probably, it's going to be quite interesting to go through this, but also it's going to highlight a few things about, where this debate is going. I personally feel like they're not only galvanizing, but they're also kind of catalyzing our movement in terms of people being aware of, African contribution to ancient civilization and the melanated nature of the ancient Egyptian civilization. I actually think they're catalyzing it, and the only people that they're actually winning over are the people who were already adamant that black people have nothing to do with anything anyway. And I think all the other people who were just simply neutral, or who were straddling the fence, or who were maybe, quite apathetic about the subject, I think they're all now probably leaning towards questioning, their education, and looking with some real serious eyes at the, at the reality that actually it's probably likely that black people were responsible for this civilization. So, yeah, thank you, Egypt, for doing us a favor with your ridiculous ridiculous response. We're going to go through this. We're going to watch I'm going to read this article. I'm going to watch a few videos. We'll have a bit of a response for some of the content. And yeah, let's see how it goes. So, found this article online by a Dutch news website. So let's kind of go through it together. Oh, by the way, this image here, I love this image. This image of, this is Nas's album. I think, which one was it? Is it I Am? Someone correct me. I think it's the Nas I Am album. He has this image on the front, and someone actually made a sculpture out of it. What a badass sculpture. I mean, that is just... I would love to have that in my house. I mean, and this is... I mean, if you want to talk about, people taking inspiration from a culture, to me, I look at this... I would love to see this exhibition. This is probably a really good advert for this exhibition. I'm sure a lot of people have booked their flights to Amsterdam as a result. So I don't know if it's Amsterdam. Sorry, to the Netherlands as a result of, this controversy, because it just makes me want to see this exhibition and actually see this piece. Because what an amazing kind of homage to, an ancient civilization. People creating new artwork that's of this standard. This is the kind of reality of this ridiculous reaction that we're getting from the Egyptians. But anyway, let's move on. Let's read. A Dutch museum has been banned from a dig in Egypt, reports the NRC, because of upset about an exhibition. So this is quite deep. They've actually been banned. Yeah, this museum has actually been responsible for a dig that's been taking place for the past, few decades, and they've actually been responsible for some of the artifacts that we're quite familiar with in this day and age. This actual museum has been responsible in uncovering. So the National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden has provoked an angry reaction on social media for an exhibition on how ancient Egypt and the area around the Nile have inspired modern musicians of African origin. So, you can clearly see there, it's about how the Nile has inspired modern musicians of African origin. So straight away there you see the stupidity of the Egyptian argument, because this is clearly about people being inspired by an ancient culture, which is obviously a good thing. How people are inspired or who's inspired should have no bearing on who the original people were. But that's where we are now. The show Kemet, and obviously we all know what Kemet means, and we're gonna go into that word in a little bit later. Egypt in hip hop, jazz, soul and funk started in April and runs until September, and looks at how primarily black American musicians from Miles Davis to Beyonce and Rihanna have interpreted ideas like spirituality, pride, power, eye makeup and costume. All positive things. However, some Facebook groups, Egypt for Egyptians probably, have reacted with anger since the exhibition also includes images previously available of pop stars like Nas as a Tutankhamun-like statue, Beyonce and Rihanna dressed as Nefertiti, and Eddie Murphy playing Pharaoh Ramesses in Michael Jackson's video. Yeah, that's what inspiration's called. Yeah, that's how we define inspiration. And I mean, whilst we're on that, I want you to all think of the lunacy of a situation where, let's say, some modern British, artists are inspired by ancient Rome, and they maybe for a music video dress up as some ancient Romans, and then the Italians, modern Italians, getting all uppity and getting their knickers in a twist and be like, you're culturally appropriating us, you're misappropriating our culture, Romans weren't you. This is how ridiculous and stupid this argument is. But anyway, let's move on. Now, according to Dutch media, and by the way, just while I'm on that point, we all know the reason for this reaction is because the Egyptians know deep down in the heart of hearts that ancient Egyptian culture is black culture. So, you know, the old saying, there's no smoke without fire. The reason they don't react like this to everyone when people dress up as Egyptians, but as soon as you have a melanated person play any role in ancient Egypt, they kick up in arms, is because they know who the Egyptians are. They know that they see them every day. It's not like they don't exist. They see the black Egyptians every day. They know that they're responsible, but they want to claim this as their own culture and to deny, you know, the black Egyptians, which is, to me, it beggars belief. Why would you not just celebrate and be a part of that? It doesn't take away from you. But anyway, I'm rambling. Let's move on. Now, according to Dutch media, Egyptian authorities have told the Dutch Museum it can no longer work on a dig in Saqqara, a research project started in 1975, because they believe it is falsifying history in its Afrocentric exhibition. So falsifying history, you're going to see this term a lot. Falsifying history, blackwashing, like what? Falsifying history by having artists dress up as pharaohs because your issue is that their skin is too dark. So if you get someone's complexion wrong, you're now accused of falsifying history. Interesting. Wim Wayland, the director of the National Museum of Antiquities, told the NRC that the research project had nothing to do with the exhibition. This is unseemly, he reportedly said. This exhibition has been created with great care, and scientists do not blame one another like this. I would like them to take it back. The museum has previously put out a statement defending its exhibition and pointing out that the care it took to work with external advisors and focus groups. Some of the commentary on social media and Google reviews revolved around whether or not ancient Egyptians could have had black skin. I mean, so stupid. First of all, none of the artists mentioned above have black skin. And as we've already know and we've discussed on this channel ad nauseum, I'd say probably less than 5% of people who are classified as politically black have black skin. In fact, artists like Beyonce and artists like, who else did they mention? Rihanna, probably share complexion with most Egyptians, if we're just talking strictly about complexion. So this is where there's so many contradictions in their argument, and they almost just come undone in the stupidity. They've just literally wholeheartedly accepted and bought into this political idea of race, and they are completely selling themselves short. It's absolutely ridiculous. The museum also receives comments via social media that are racist and offensive in nature. Absolutely. And I received them as well. Obviously from people from these Egypt for the Egyptian people, and obviously not just them, by the way. I'm not going to blame just them. A lot of racism and hatred comes from people of European descent. They tend to actually be the most racist, and they actually don't mind pretending that they're Middle Eastern or Arab or Egyptian or Moroccan to do it. They're so sad. I don't understand. There's actually a sect of sad people out there pretending to be somewhere, literally full-time job, trolling Afrocentrics. What a sad bunch of people. The museum pointed out, these are not tolerated by the museum. We cordially invite everyone to visit the exhibition and form their own opinions, and I thoroughly intend to. Dr. Daniel Solomon, curator of the Egyptian and Nubian collection, who is half Egyptian, so bear that in mind, half Egyptian, said that it was important to show aspects of popular culture that were sometimes neglected in the museum world. So what he's talking about essentially here is the fact that, you know, they know that largely black people are neglected in African history. And when I'm talking about African history, I'm talking about obviously ancient Kemet. I think ancient Egypt is often presented as being rather monolithic. Now that word is key because I've mentioned this before. This idea of this monolithic race theory, this idea that this is the ancient Egyptian race, and it's one specific look, one specific phenotype, one specific complexion. And so now we've established what that monolithic race is. Everything that doesn't fit that monolithic race could not possibly be Egyptian. And obviously modern Egyptians have decided that it just happens to be whatever they currently look like. However, what they currently look like is a little bit debatable. It's a little bit debatable. There's a lot of elasticity to that, and we're going to talk about that shortly. The fact that even the way modern Egyptians portray themselves is not how they truly look. And that is not me being cryptic. I'm going to show you some things during this video. He added, there will have been people who nowadays would have been called in Western terminology black people. Absolutely, of course, we know that. That was a majority, if not all of them, but I'm not going to go into that right now. That doesn't mean that we can put the label on an entire culture that lasted for 3,000 years. That's also very true. But that's something that is difficult to maybe explain to people, especially if certain stereotypes have been perpetuated. Absolutely. One such stereotype being the movie Aladdin, which clearly people put way too much stock in. Agrabah is not real, people. Okay? Agrabah is not real, and Ben-Hur is not a historical resource. Okay, if you really want to know what these people look like, you're going to need to do a little bit more work than that. Wayland has invited delegates from Egypt to visit the museum and make up their own minds. Okay, so there you go. That's the kind of overview of that story. So now you kind of know the background to it. I'm sure most people knew it already, but it was good for us to kind of read that together. I'm getting a lot of comments. I'm probably not going to be able to read through all of them and do the video as well. So if I'm ignoring you, I'm not deliberately ignoring you. Obviously, if I get a super chat, I'll read it out straight away. But if it's kind of just like normal comments, I'm going to dart back and forth. In fact, I think now's a good time to kind of just have a quick overview before I jump into the next resource that I want to cover. So let's just see if there's anything here worth... Yeah, I like this comment. Egypt is not a race or nationality, so the whole Egypt for Egyptians slogan makes no sense. Absolutely. You know, that whole Egypt for Egyptians thing is the most stupid thing. Because, first of all, you know, Egypt is on the African continent. And this whole idea of, you know, you'll hear Egyptians now say, we're not Arabs. And then they'll say, we're not African. Okay, so what are you? We're Egyptians. No, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, doesn't make any sense. All right. Yes, we know you're Egyptian, but you're African. Okay, and this whole new arrogance, and it's very new, by the way, this Egypt for Egyptians and this idea of being an Egyptian, not being an African or an Arab. This is very new because, all due respect, 20 years ago, before Afrocentrics had made Egypt relevant again, let's be totally honest with you. Let's be totally frank with you. And I'm going to do a whole video on this. People who are classified as Afrocentrics are the ones who, for the past 40 to 50 years, but I'd say 20 years, obviously, since the internet's been out, but the past 40 to 50 years are the ones who have made Egypt relevant. They're the ones who have pushed against the establishment who has undermined Egypt and who has undermined ancient Kemet and who has sought to kind of like brush its technology under the carpet. Who are the ones who have been pushing against this narrative and pushing Egyptian technology, Egyptian knowledge, Egyptian philosophy, Egyptian medicine? Who's been pushing this? It's not Egyptian people. It's largely been Afrocentric movement that's been at the forefront of really putting Egypt back in the conversation. And now Egypt's back in the conversation. They want to turn around, or at least certain people want to turn around and say, oh, well, we're not African and we're not Arab, we're Egyptian. It's like, well, 20 years ago, you were happy to call yourself the Arab Republic of Egypt. You're quite happy to say, we're not Africans, we're Arabs. I've had Egyptians say that to me before. I'm not making that up. Okay? I've had many Egyptians say it to me before. But this is back when being Egyptian wasn't cool. In fact, when I used to live in the Middle East, and that was literally only 15 years ago, I would meet several Egyptians who would say, I'm Arab, I'm not African. They'd be quite proud of the fact of saying, I'm Arab, I'm Arab, I'm Arab. But now it seems like, this whole movement, Egypt for Egyptians, is like, no, I'm Egyptian. It's like, why can't you be African? What's wrong with being African? Because likewise, like I've also met and known many Egyptians who are very proud of being African. Okay, obviously, all the southern Egypt, the Aswans, the Aswani people, they're obviously very proud of their Africanicity, and they will proudly tell you that they're African. But there are also Egyptians who are in Egypt who are not like these kind of like ones who claim to be strictly Egyptian or claim to be Arab and who say, I'm African. And that's really where, this new arrogance, it's very hard to kind of place. It's kind of like, what are you being so arrogant about? It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, I know a guy named Bassem. Yeah, nice guy. I haven't asked his thoughts on the topic, but I will broach them. I'm sure he is. Yeah, I mean, obviously we know that, and we'll touch on that. So, Leaves has written, in general, history of Africa states that the culture of Kemet was drastically changed after the invasion of the Greeks, Romans, Arabs in particular. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to touch on all of that. But let's move on. Let's now. I'm going to try playing some video, and I'm going to need a bit of feedback from you to make sure that this actually works. So, here's my first video. I'm going to play it a little bit. The intro is a bit rubbish anyway.
A museum exhibition has sparked,
let me know if you can hear it,
a cultural war, a controversy. An event displayed black singers dressed as the rulers of ancient Egypt. The singers include stars like Beyonce, even Rihanna, and this has caused major outrage among Egyptian officials. And the officials have now banned Dutch archaeologists from Egypt.
Because
our next report getting you the complete
Are you
story.
able to hear the audio? Just give me a chat update. Yes, thank you, Nola. Super. Okay, so I can move on.
American singers and performers dress up in unique and quirky outfits. Hollywood actors have worn outrageous costumes on the red carpet. Sometimes the outfits make it to the headlines. This story is about an outfit that has triggered a major controversy. So, what happened? In the Netherlands, a museum exhibition on how ancient Egypt has influenced modern black musicians displayed black American singers and other performers as Egyptian pharaohs and queens. This attracted strong criticism from Egyptian authorities. Egyptian officials were offended and banned Dutch archaeologists from the country. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities wrote to this museum 2 weeks ago, accusing it of falsifying history and Afrocentrism. The museum...
Okay, so I just want to pause on that because I mentioned falsifying history. Thank you very much, by the way, Opinion Nerded, who said Egypt is for the $10. I really appreciate it. Egypt for Egyptians is nothing but a carbon copy of xenophobic white nationalist slogan, Europe for Europeans. Absolutely. And it's funny how when they make that Egypt for Egyptians statement, they happily will exclude the indigenous dark-skinned Egyptians who are not a part of that slogan. Because when you turn around and say, okay, Egypt for Egyptians, does that include the black Egyptians? They'll quickly change the subject or kind of try and have a workaround. So what do you mean Egypt for Egyptians? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I totally agree with you. But yeah, I wanted to touch really quickly on this kind of idea of falsifying that they like to bring up. Okay, so falsifying. And the idea of, falsifying, what does that even mean? You've got someone there and they're dressed up as an Egyptian, and as a result of that, you're now happy to say, oh, well, you're falsifying history because a black person is dressed up as an Egyptian. Okay, so I'm just going to share an image of everyone really quickly. And this is the image that I took. Now, I'm going to ask, first of all, does anyone know what this image is of? Oh, by the way, guys, hit the likes up so we can get as many people online to this as well. But does anyone know what this image is of? So I'm going to tell you, in case people don't kind of aren't aware of it. But this is an image of Hadrian. Okay. Now, why am I showing you this image? Well, This image, or this statue, I should say, was in the British Museum. And this statue was at the entrance of the British Museum, okay, for a very, very long time. Very close, not on Mark Antony, it's Hadrian. And I'm going to read you I took a picture of the plaque, okay? So, in fact, let me just read the plaque to you, and I'm going to make my point. So, here's the plaque, and we can read this together. So, Antonius as Osiris. Antonius was the lover of the Roman... Sorry, so it's not Hadrian, it's Antonius. Antonius was the lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Okay, so, first of all, straight away, this guy is homosexual. Now, I'm not making any judgments about that. Please do not cancel or demonetize me. But the point I'm making is, we all know that the Arab Republic of Egypt is a strict Islamic nation. Okay, so we've got that first of all, and we can see from the image that this guy is clearly not Arab. This is a you know a European looking male. Okay, so we've got this European statue. Okay, now this statue wasn't discovered. Antonius is shown here as Osiris, suggesting that he too was reborn as a god from the waters of the Nile. The stance, headdress and loincloth resemble Egyptian statues, but have been slightly altered in the classical, naturalistic and subtly eroticized style. This statue was discovered in 1738 to 1739 near what we know as a spectacular memorial to Antonius in Hadrian's villa. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't even think this statue is contemporaneous with Hadrian and Antonius. It says AD 117, but to me this is not consistent with work of that time period. This looks kind of classical, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. So I don't even think that this is a kind of an ancient Roman statue. But the point is, and here's the point that I'm making, this guy is at the entrance of the Egyptian exhibit in the British Museum for at least a decade. So you come into the Egyptian exhibition in the British Museum, and this is the first statue you see. Not an Egyptian. Also, practicing what we can say is something that is against the current Egyptians' religion. Okay? Clearly, I mean, if you're going to talk about heresy and falsifying history, this is much bigger than anything that the Dutch Museum did. And this, they were presenting this as though it was an ancient Egyptian artifact at the entrance of the British Museum. Did you hear anybody make a peep out of Egypt? Did they say, take that statue down? Did they say, don't have that statue at the entrance? Did they say, you're falsifying history? Did they say, you're trying to sell ancient Egypt as though it was something that it was not? Did they say, you're insulting us by putting, someone who doesn't, believe in our sexual practices at the entrance of the none of this? Not a peep out of the Egyptians. They're absolutely fine with this. Okay? They are absolutely fine with this. And I'm telling you, I'm not sure if this is still there, because I didn't go that way around last time I went to the British Museum, but I can tell you that it was there for at least a decade. At least a decade, right at the entrance of the ancient Egyptian exhibit. So it goes to show you the very, very clear... I mean, you could see what the British Museum were doing. They're trying to trick people into coming in and straight away saying, oh, well, there's the ancient Egyptians. They're clearly European people just like we are today. But Egypt has no problem with this. Not a peep out of them. And it goes to show you how ridiculous their kind of double standards are, which is why I don't take all of this.
Include stars like Beyonce, even Rihanna, and this has caused major
Hello, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. My laptop just literally turned itself off. I have no idea why, but I don't think there's any conspiracy theory. I think it's just being a bit weird again. But I'm okay. I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. It's literally in the middle of it there. We've lost quite a few of you, but thank you for staying. And sorry, I missed the super thanks as well. Thank you, Stephen Carter, for the $30, man. That is really, really generous of you. I very, very much appreciate that. Let's dive back in because we were kind of midway through. I think I'd made my point. I think I'd finished making my point regarding, Antonius being at the entrance of the British Museum and the Egyptians having no problem with that. And they do that a lot, by the way, in the British Museum, put a lot of non-Egyptian artifacts throughout, sprinkle them throughout to kind of like skew people's perceptions on what ancient Egypt is, and they won't even, clearly label it. So let's be clear, let's be honest about the way that we're approaching this subject. By the way, so let's carry on. I'm gonna click play. I think
Egyptian officials were offended and banned Dutch archaeologists from the country. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities wrote to this museum 2 weeks ago, accusing it of falsifying history and Afrocentrism. The museum has called out the move, saying Egypt has long been studied primarily as part of the Mediterranean region. But many musicians with African roots emphasize that ancient Egypt is an African culture. Beyoncé, one of the most well-known African singers in the world, was heavily...
I love that. I'm not sure which channel this is, but they call Beyoncé an African singer. I mean, technically, yes. Well, oh dear. Come on, she's American. All right, let's
He criticized for her outfit. The singer dressed up as the Egyptian queen Nefertiti at the Coachella Festival in 2018.
Imagine criticized for dressing up as a deceased queen from 3,000 years ago. Just imagine that. That is what we have to put up with. And actually, whilst we're on the topic of Beyonce and Rihanna, who seem to be at the kind of like two of the headline names that they've mentioned here, yeah, let's just do a little bit of a look as to what Egyptian people actually look like, because I think we really have to have this discussion about, once again, what race is, because it's kind of like, oh, how dare you use black people? And it's like, well, this is an Egyptian. Okay, this is an Egyptian, right? And this is not a Nubian Egyptian. This is just a normal Egyptian. Okay, these are two girls from Cairo. Now, it's really important to understand that a lot of the people who will even make these claims of Egypt for Egyptian, a lot of them will look like this. So this is the thing, when you're African and you understand kind of like the phenotypic diversity of Africa and the fact that kind of people can just look so different in different parts of Africa, the ludicrousness of people who kind of look like this being angry at black people. It's kind of like you if you were in America, you'd be black. Yeah, these are two girls from Cairo. If you were in America, you'd be black, but you're not. You're in Egypt, so you classify yourself as either an Arab or an Egyptian, and it's absolutely ludicrous because it's just a political tag. It's just something that you're, I've always been very much of the olive branch approach when it comes to the Egyptians, even though I know the history of northern Egypt, and even though I know, the history of invasion, this, that, and the other. To me, this is going to sound bizarre, but ethnicity shouldn't matter. This is going to sound really bizarre, so you're going to have to stick with me on this one, okay? Ethnicity is something that has become very, very important in very recent times, and that's what people don't realize. The idea of ethnicity. Now, stay with me, okay? Don't lose me, because this is a really important point that I'm going to stress here, and some of you might not catch this, but I'm going to say it. The idea of ethnicity actually came along with racism, because ethnicity came along when people had to start answering the question, but where are you from? It's not suffice for me to be a black man in England. So where are you from? And then I start aligning with my ethnicity. as opposed to my nationality. And that's not an ancient thing. That's the thing. People don't realize that this idea of us kind of aligning to our ethnicities is something that we do because essentially we have to do it. We have to know, where we're from. We have to have somewhere that we call home. In an ideal world, people's ethnicities actually didn't really matter that much. I.e., when you've been, let me give a perfect example. Let's take the Greeks that invaded, that came along with Alexander the Great, yeah? And the Greeks that came along with Alexander the Great and they invaded, Egypt, okay? And many of them have settled in Alexandria and the Fayum and different parts of Egypt, okay? How many generations do you think it took before that history of where they came from became irrelevant? That's the question. How? 1 generation, 2 generation? In 4 or 5 generations' time, do you think the fact that they originally came from Greece even mattered to them? Do you think they had any connection to Greece? The answer is very, very unlikely. Okay, they would have just become intermingled and part of that society. So they would have just classified themselves as being Egyptian. Okay, much like if racism didn't exist, most black Americans would just classify themselves as being Americans because that's what's relevant. Like, we've been here for the past 100, 200, 300, 400 years, so we're American. The only reason the African tag exists is because you have to answer that question. Where are you from? That's where the ethnicity thing comes in. So people who have resided in a land for a certain amount of time will ultimately say, I am of this land. Okay, I am Egyptian. I am American. I am English. Give it 2 generations, my kids might say they're English. They might not say they're Nigerian because they won't really have a connection to that land. So the point of the matter is, all of this idea of ethnicity that we have, it all rests on this idea of racism that's been forced down our throat. And if racism didn't exist, ethnicity wouldn't exist. And if ethnicity wouldn't exist, you'd just go to every nation and see every hue. And that's how the old world used to be. You used to just go to nations and just see lots and lots of people of different hues, particularly in Europe. Europe was one of the main places that you'd find people of the darkest hue to the lightest hue, all living in the same city and just kind of like, well, where are you from? I'm from Birmingham. And that's the end of the car. Oh, you're from Birmingham. Like Bob, that's how simple the conversation was. So I've gone off a little bit of a rant, but the point I'm making is that the fact that people have invaders' blood or this, that, and the other, I don't get too hung up on that. It doesn't make any difference to me. I think where the issue comes is when they try and turn around and then say, but the ancient Egyptians weren't black. That's where I'm going to take umbrage. I just want to be like, well, you're being absolutely ridiculous now because they're provably black. They clearly were what we classify as black today. And they clearly were culturally the same as other African cultures. If you, as an Egyptian, turn around and you're like, oh, well, you know what? I'm African. Forget all this crap. I'm African and, I've been here for years and this is what I am. And I'm not going to try and deny that ancient Egyptian was a black society. I've got time for you. I absolutely do. I promise you, because like I said, an African's an African in my view. So it's really weird because ethnicity has been given, in my view, far too much kind of importance. And like I said, it's just something that's just lingers as a result of racism. But the moment you remove racism, people's ethnicity becomes very irrelevant because ultimately you kind of are where you've been residing for the longest time. Now, I know that's kind of like a difficult one to place, all right, in terms of a discussion, but I try not to buy into this idea of monolith or racial monoliths. The Yoruba people look like this, the Igbo people look like this. I kind of have been African for long enough to just kind of know that every phenotype is represented in most tribes in Africa, and it's because of this very reason that we didn't used to give much we didn't give much regard to ethnicity. My wife is Nigerian, well, half Nigerian, half Vincentian, half Nigerian. So my wife's half Nigerian, but her Nigerian half, her dad carries the name Williams, which, as you can hear, is not a native Nigerian name. It's a Welsh name. He doesn't carry, from what I know, any Welsh blood. And his family 2 generations ago were in Sierra Leone. And I suspect were probably before Sierra Leone. This is my theory. My theory is before them were probably in Liberia. Ethnicity is irrelevant. It really is. You know, ethnicity is really, really irrelevant. Okay, what actually kind of matters is where you reside. That's the culture that you take on. So I think if you get past all this race kind of like, the only reason obviously we sit here and we kind of like, we want the world to kind of understand that ancient Egypt was a black culture is because it's true. that's my main motivation. I don't know what other people's motivations are. My motivation is because it's true. You know, all the other stuff that comes as a result, you know, the empowerment, this, that, and the other, that's all great. But the bottom line is I push it because it's true. Hey, they were black, they were African, deal with it. All right. It's up to you where you place it, you know? But yeah, so there you go. And obviously someone's made a very good point there. The importance of race started with Caucasians. Well, racism racism in the system that we have it, the caste system that we have it, definitely started with white race, obviously. So I'm not here trying to spread the blame or anything, but the point of the matter is that ethnicity isn't that important. So there you go. That's just kind of one. I'll just kind of throw that one in there for free, you know. I mean, someone just put a comment there. Before race was important in Africa, it was about what tribe you descended from. Well, I'd say it was maybe about what tribe you were from. But if you decided you're going to migrate to another nation, you would become quickly infused within that culture within 1 or 2 generations. And in fact, by 2 generations, your child would absorb that culture, and the ethnicity that they came from would largely, probably in 1 or 2 generations, be totally irrelevant because they'll just become the new culture they were in. This is historically what people have always done. You know, it's kind of where we've obviously taken on these habits, and we've assigned importance to certain behaviors and certain things like ethnicity, which actually really, you know, if you look kind of like in our ancient behavior, was never really that important. And this is the thing. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, let's move on. So, but the point I was making with this image is that these 2 girls would be black in most nations, and yet they're crying out kind of Egypt is for the Arabs, also Egypt for Egyptians. And how about this woman over here? This is by the way, I'm just going to give context to all these people because I haven't just pulled up random images. These aren't like random North Africans. This is definitely a 1 second. Oh, I just lost a text for this. But this is a woman who's kind of like, she's kind of like challenging, I can't remember what it was. She started a bit of a movement in Egypt anyway. But anyway, this is another Egyptian woman. And another point that I want to touch on as well, and this is probably a really important point. Okay, this is probably a really, really important point. Is that Egyptians aren't supposed to be this pale. And this is going to be another one that's a little bit controversial, but has anybody heard of Fair and Lovely? Okay, I'm gonna bring up a page now because this is a conversation that we need to have. All right, most Egyptians basically mildly bleach their skin. When I say mildly bleach, they bleach their skin. Okay, there's probably very little mild about it. Okay, I'm just gonna Google Fair and Lovely for you really quickly. Now, Fair and Lovely just so you know, is the highest selling cosmetic product in Asia and the Middle East, and has been so for, I think, a few decades now. Okay. They've actually changed their name recently to Glow and Lovely because they get criticized, but they're noted by their bottle. Let me just go to images really quickly because I want to give you some joke. I shouldn't laugh, but let's have a laugh together. This is the kind of ads they run. So look, I'm a sad Asian girl because I'm too dark, but I'm smiling now because I've bleached myself lighter. And that's literally their ad campaign. Look, this woman, she's so embarrassed of her dark skin, she has to cover it with a veil. But look at the beauty that's released when she starts bleaching. This is endemic. But I'm laughing, but people use this stuff like skin cream. And I say this once again as someone who lived in the Middle East. I remember when we first got there, we had to go to, I think, 3 or 4 supermarkets. Actually, no, we didn't find them in the end, we ended up importing our cream from the UK because we went to 3 or 4 supermarkets and all we could find was skin lightening cream. They didn't just do normal skin lotion. It's endemic. And this was in Qatar, not in Egypt, but Egypt has exactly the same problem. It's endemic in the culture. Everybody bleaches. So when they kind of sell you this idea that, black people are dissatisfied with their skin color or this, that, and the other, actually, out of all of the melanated ethnicities, black people bleach the least by a country mile. We literally bleach the least by a country mile. Black people barely bleach when it comes to comparing. The worst nation is India. India has the highest rates of bleaching. Okay. And it's followed by the Middle East. Everybody in the Middle East bleaches. So imagine you have a child, you slather their skin in this Fair and Lovely stuff to make them as light as possible. Okay. And I could go through articles and stuff, but I'm going to let you guys look, just Google it. If you want to have a bit of entertaining read tonight, Google Fair and Lovely and you'll see what comes up, because it's steeped in controversy. So you just got to Google it and you'll just see articles kind of like condemning it. You'll see news articles. It's not something that's celebrated, but they make billions from it annually in Asia and the Middle East. And everybody does it. They literally cream their skin in this stuff. So when you see an Egyptian person, they talk about, Egyptians look like us, fair skin. Just always bear in mind they're probably about 3 or 4 tones lighter than their natural complexion. And that is just a fact. Okay, that is just the fact. They all bleach. It's literally endemic in the culture. Another thing that they do that they actually hide quite a lot is that they relax their hair as well. So once again, Asians and Middle Easterners probably relax their hair more than black people do. So these are other things that I remember walking into a barber shop when I used to live in Qatar. And when I walked into the barber shop, this is a men's barber shop, obviously it's a barber shop. Walked into the barber shop, they had rows and rows of Esco hair relaxer kit. And I walked in, I was like, what's that for? I was like, do you have black customers? He said, oh, no, this is our Asian customers. They all relax their hair. He said, particularly North African ones, they don't like their curls. They want their hair straight. I was like, oh my goodness me. I did not know that. So just to be clear, when you look and you're kind of presented with this phenotype from North Africa, bear in mind that they should be a lot darker. And I would actually venture to guess that your average Egyptian, I'm not going to talk for all of North Africa now, but I would actually venture to guess that your average Egyptian phenotypically is probably not far off your kind of Habesha, kind of Ethiopian kind of looking person. That's your average kind of Egyptian without all of the aids. Now, obviously, we know when I say aids, I mean as in helps, as in their skin aids and their hair relaxing aids. This is the thing. So modern Egyptians are actually a lot more African than they give off. Okay, they're a lot more African than they give off, and yeah. So this is just something to bear in mind, and one of the reasons why I believe a lot of the stuff and a lot of the disagreement that takes place between kind of Egyptians and I would say Africans, for want of a better word, is political. They have a political hatred towards blackness and being associated, and a lot of that hatred actually comes from the Arab, the Arab kind of contingent, this idea of looking down on Africans because they've benefited so much from that. So it's very complex, but it's just kind of important to address that. A lot of them resemble Syrians and Turks. Yeah, that's true. That is true. There's a lot of them that are pale, but there's also a lot of them that aren't. So I just wanted to kind of talk about the full spectrum, because you have obviously those who are in as one, the ones who are, for want of a better word, politically black. Then you have a lot in the north, or at least ones that look very Turkic, the ones who have got very recent Mamluk ancestry. But I've always believed that the greatest contingent of kind of modern northern Egyptians comes from their Greek ancestry. I actually believe their Greek ancestry is much stronger than even the recent Arab ancestry. I think a lot of it is the Greek ancestry, where you get a lot of these kind of brown phenotypes, and the ones that kind of carry a lot of that ancestry, I believe that carries, like the ancient Greeks, carries a lot of that kind of African phenotype with it as well. So this is kind of what my mind is on that. Anyway, I've been rambling, man. Let's get back to some of these videos. I think I'd kind of done that one to death anyway. I wanted to do a good one. Where is it? Yes.
Nothing to hide.
This is a really
if it wouldn't be true that ain't.
Yeah, this is it. So this is done by a girl called Ivy Anita. I really liked it. I really enjoyed this song. I'll kind of play this video to you guys, and we'll go in.
Ancient Egypt was black African. Why all of this drama? When Europeans played Pharaoh and Cleopatra, not a word from Egypt, because they know it's not true. But when African people and melanated people play ancient Egyptian or Kemetic characters, Egypt acts more defensively than any nation we have seen so far. Are they hiding something?
Egyptians said stop playing with them. Egypt is not in Africa. They said they don't know what you guys are looking at. Egypt is definitely not in Africa, according to them. And the Dutch people responded and said, what in the Helen Keller is going on? If you need the translation in Braille, I got you, because Egypt is definitely in Africa. And matter of fact, this accusation of falsifying history is inappropriate. The exhibition has been made with great care. As scientists, you don't accuse each other like this. I want the qualification to be withdrawn. And the Dutch are really doubling down. They're like, we're not altering crap at this exhibit. Matter of fact, one of you guys need to come see it and have a discussion, because there's nothing wrong with the exhibit at all. But the story didn't even start there, because the Dutch were already in hot water with the Egyptians for saying this. Bottom line, Egypt has a huge battle on their hands if they keep trying to claim that their people look like this and nothing like this.
So recently,
and I think that's a really good point that he just made. It's kind of like, they're happy when their culture's being associated with European people. They will have no complaints, just like we looked earlier at that kind of Antonius statue, etc., and the examples that he gave. But when it comes to any kind of like even a little tiny association with melanated people, regardless of how much those people look like native Egyptians, so like we've already established, Beyonce, Rihanna, and this woman who played Cleopatra, their complexions are all within the realms of what is very normal, even in northern Egypt. Very, very normal. Obviously, we take away the bleaching, the fair and lovely. I would say this is probably what the standard phenotype would be in northern Egypt currently. But they have a problem with it. So in some ways, there's an element of self-hate there as well, which is quite interesting, because this whole obsession with the people's inability to separate the word black from the color black, I find that bizarre. It's kind of like, we're not black. It's like, yeah, we're not black either, man. What are you talking about? Yeah, no one. I mean, there are black people, but there's not a lot of them. Okay, most people are brown. All right, we're brown. You're kind of beige. Yeah, kind of pale beige. You would be brown, but you put a lot of bleach in your skin. So, yeah, I'm not sure what you are at the moment. But, no one's black here. And it's really bizarre. Anyway, let's listen to this girl. I like her.
There was a little bit of a saga. A little bit? Nah, it wasn't a little. There was a massive saga when Netflix released the Cleopatra documentary, right? Egyptians were not very pleased with that documentary at all because Cleopatra was played by a black woman, right? I did not cover that situation, by the way, but I'm sure a good number of us are aware that that happened. But now another situation is up, and this happened a few days ago. The Egyptians are really going hard and fighting against Afrocentrism. A little read from this article here. It says a Dutch museum says its archaeologists have been banned from carrying out excavations at a key Egyptian site over an exhibition exploring the influence of ancient Egypt on black musicians. The National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden said Egyptian authorities had accused it of falsifying history through its showcase of work by artists including Beyoncé, Nas, and Miles Davis. The museum also said that it had received comments via social media that were read to desist or offensive in nature since the exhibition opened. The dispute comes only weeks after Egyptian authorities condemned a new Netflix docudrama series depicting Queen Cleopatra as a black African as a falsification of history. The Antiquities Ministry insisted that Cleopatra had Hellenistic Greek features, including light skin.
I always find it so hilarious. Obviously we've done this whole Cleopatra thing ad nauseum, but once again, just the amount of they feel so passionately. It's like, why of all the things you got to take, Netflix to court over, you got to do it because they showed a Greek woman as being like, you disagree with the race of a Greek woman. She would have what's Hellenistic features? What does that even mean? Because now you've got to go into this whole, I get when you're complaining about, well, I don't get it because it's stupid, but, when you're complaining about the way they portray Egyptians, you want them to look like you. So you have a problem with that. But why do you care what Cleopatra looks like? And if you want to go into that argument and start proving what the ancient Greeks look like or the Macedonians look like, that's a whole nother discussion that we need to have there. But it's hilarious because the issue is, it clearly shows that there's a massive fear of any association being made with blackness and ancient Egypt. It's like they're going to fight against it tooth and nail as soon as it kind of rears its head. And that's what they're trying to do, because if we're going to look under the skin of all this, or under the surface of all this, the overreaction to the Cleopatra Netflix drama, and then banning this museum because they dared to have black people near the ancient Egyptian exhibit, this is fear tactics. This is what you call, this is buck breaking. This is the attempt to kind of like, I'm going to really make an example. We're going to really come down heavy so that no one will ever dare associate ancient Egypt with black people again. And bear in mind, they do this whilst having a black population. They have people who are far darker than Beyonce in Egypt at the moment, okay? And not necessarily living in Aswan, all over Egypt. They have these dark-skinned people all over, and they absolutely do not give a damn about them. And that's one of the saddest things, because the amount of difficulty you must feel being a melanated person. I actually know quite a few people who are subscribed to my channel are melanated Egyptians. Some of them aren't from Aswan. Some of them just live in the main cities of Egypt, Cairo, Alexandria, and they're just, they're black Egyptians. Their family's black, and they've always been there, and they've always been black. And they're like a voiceless people, because whilst all of these race to the cyst people are out there shouting Egypt for the Egyptians, they're sitting there and thinking to themselves, but I'm Egyptian. I've always been Egyptian. My blood is Egyptian. I've been here. You and I know that they're probably the most pure in terms of closest to the ancient Kemetic culture, probably more so than anybody else in that nation. And they're totally marginalized. They're voiceless. They're being bullied by this kind of this mob, this rabble of people who have decided that they're gonna decide what the Egyptian race is / was. They're going to be the voice. This Bassem Youssef, for instance, this lawyer who took, he's gone and done the rounds. I wonder if he gives a damn about black Egyptians. I wonder if has anyone ever confronted him about this. Tell us about, how do melanated Egyptians feel about your lawsuit? Do they support it? I wonder if he gives a damn, or I wonder if he abuses them when he sees them or looks down on them. Because I kind of know what I'm leaning towards. It's amazing. That's kind of what they get away with in terms of these things. But yeah.
The exhibition also looks at what scientific research has revealed about ancient Egypt and Nubia and discusses how they have been studied from Eurocentric and Afrocentric perspectives. The ROMO said in a statement on Wednesday that it was disappointed to be informed in a recent email from a senior Egyptian antiquities official that it was no longer allowed to excavate at the Saqqara necropolis near Cairo after almost 50 years of work there. In quote, the Egyptian authorities have every right to terminate a permit for an excavation. After all, it is their land and their heritage. However, the museum considers the underlying arguments for this decision incorrect.
I mean, the depths of that. Can you imagine 50 years of work and they're closing it because of a Nas statue and the fact that they put up a poster of Beyonce when she was dressed up as Nefertiti? This, this is what you call going to extremes. And like I said, in my view, they're just showing their ass. They really are. I think they're embarrassing themselves. And you will see nothing but words of support from people who are that way inclined. But like I said before, I think the kind of the moderate person in a general public looks at this and this goes, this is bizarre, isn't it? This is weird behavior. I've heard people from England saying, oh, it's great to see the Egyptians standing up for themselves. Stand up for themselves against what exactly? Stand up for themselves against people dressing up as Egyptians. Where's the victory in that? Okay, so you gotta stop people from dressing up as Egyptians because it's your history. And actually, this comes onto another really important point. This point of, in fact, cultural appropriation. Okay, this is a point that I've heard thrown about now. They are appropriating our culture. That one almost makes me throw up a little bit in my mouth. I've got to be totally honest with you, because first of all, that's not cultural appropriation. Okay, you can't appropriate a culture that no longer exists. Okay, that culture, you do not practice that culture. Okay, there is no relationship, zero relationship between modern Egyptian culture and ancient Egyptian culture. There has been zero carry through, and this has been one of the biggest arguments that people who, like me, who you call Afrocentrists, have made about the connection between Africa and ancient Egypt, because there's cultural continuity between African nations and African cultures and ancient Egypt, but there's zero continuity between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt. Zero continuity. So you can't turn around to people and say, well, you're culturally appropriating us, because it's not your culture. You don't practice that culture. As far as if Beyonce didn't dress up as Nefertiti, it would be a completely dead culture because no one's practicing it in your nation. That is not the same as when people culturally appropriate African or black people. And let's keep it funky. The most culturally appropriated people in the world are African Americans. That goes without saying. Okay, the most culturally appropriated people in the world are African Americans, and they're alive. Okay, you culturally appropriate them when they're live, kicking, breathing. You will steal their music, put your name on it. You will steal their dress, put your name on it. Over here in England, even like London, we are so culturally appropriated as melanated people. Can't get a trim at your bloody local barber now because everybody gets fades now. Everybody gets fades. Yeah. Everybody wears trainers like we wear trainers. Everybody speaks slang like we speak slang. Everybody listens to our music. Everybody is an R&B singer. Everybody does everything that we do. That's cultural appropriation. When you actually have a culture, something that's unique to you, something that was unique to African Americans, something that was unique to Black British people, something that was unique to Africans, and the world sees it and says, oh, I'll have a bit of that. That sounds good. And we're not going to give any credit back to them. We're going to look down on them whilst we're using and whilst we're stealing their culture, and we're going to monetize their culture. That's cultural appropriation. People celebrating a long dead culture in terms of that part of the world and bringing it back to life is not cultural appropriation. Okay, that's called cultural appreciation. You should be thanking Black people for resurrecting Kemetic culture and making it interesting, because God knows 20 years ago all you guys were interested in was Islam. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, because I love my Islamic brothers and sisters. But let's be totally real. The Arab Republic of Egypt had no interest in ancient Egypt. They didn't even know the word Kemet existed until Black people brought it to the forefront. Now you want to turn around and call yourself Kemet queens and Kemet princesses after we told you what the blood clot word means. Excuse my French. After we told you what the word means. After we brought Egyptian studies to the forefront of the educational systems, now you want to turn around to us and tell us that we're culturally appropriating that African culture. Spare me. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but, I want to go into that one.
It added, the Egyptian authorities conclude that our current exhibition is about falsifying the ancient Egyptian history. This political argument is used to express the dissatisfaction with the exhibition and to ban our excavation. The RMO also expressed surprise that the argument was being made by people who have not actually seen the exhibition. You know what I find most interesting in all of this? It's not even the controversy. What I find most interesting is the fact that
hit up the likes, by the way. I got 293 viewers.
Egyptians have been okay with the fact likes. That these scientists, archaeologists, whomever go into Egypt, dig out their mummies, do all sorts of things there. They have been okay with that for years, even though we look at it like that's weird that you let these people go in and dig up mummies and just, disturb the dead. It's very disrespectful.
Sorry, that's going to get a rewind. Okay, because I spoke over that, but I think that's one of the most important parts. Have a listen to this.
What I find most interesting is the fact that for years now, Egyptians have been okay with the fact that these scientists, archaeologists, whomever go into Egypt, dig out their mummies, do all sorts of things there. They have been okay with that for years, even though we look at it like that's weird that you let these people go in and dig up mummies and just, disturb the dead. It's very disrespectful. But for years, these people were okay with all of that, right? But who would have thought that what it would take for these people to put a ban on archaeology, scientists, whomever, from going to their country to disrespect their dead, disrespect holy sites, and, do all sorts of scientific disrespectful things in Egypt, right? Would be for these people to portray Black people as ancient Egyptians. Who would have thought that? I know.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to, I want to give a slow hand clap here to Miss Ivy and Anita for that little speech there, because that is exactly my sentiments. Imagine we've had centuries of Eurocentrics digging up the dead. We already know about the fact that they used to burn the mummies, eat the mummies like cannibals, disrespect their temples, flood their antiquities. There's not a level of disrespect that hasn't been faced. Pull them out of their tombs, strip them out of their caskets, literally peel them out of their sarcophagus so they can display their bodies, put their bodies on display in museums. Absolute disrespect of a culture that almost says, unequivocally, you have no connection to this culture. Because no one with a connection to a culture would allow that to happen? And if those are your ancestors, would you allow someone to dig your grandma up like that and put her on display? Let's keep it real. The fact that this was allowed shows there's a total disconnect, and this is just a monetary and exchange, because the line could have been drawn way before they got there. The line could have been drawn, people like, Carter, Petrie, coming in with their, excavators, spades and their diggers. They could have drawn a line and said, look, you gotta do this, you can do all that, that's fine, but you do not remove them from their casket. That is a disrespect. Did any Egyptian antiquities minister ever say that? And if not, you have to ask why not. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Because if you try to go to England and talk about you're going to be digging up this king and that king and this king and that king, and you're going to put them on display and pop them in a microwave and do this and that, disrespect to their body, yeah, I'm sure they would have something to say. They said, no, you certainly will not be disturbing Queen Elizabeth. She will rest. You won't be touching her body. But yet, when it comes to the African kings and queens, have no problem putting every level of disrespect. But Beyonce dresses like Nefertiti, and now it's like toys out of the pram. Toys out of the pram. When Carter found Tutankhamun and literally pulled his body apart limb from limb to the point where none of his limbs were connecting, and they had to kind of like reconnect him afterwards. You had no problem with that. You watched as he did that. That's fine. But Beyonce dressed up as Nefertiti and you're like, oh no, we got to stop this.
No, I didn't think it. Did you? Let us know down below in the comment section. Like, these people are telling us that what they find most disrespectful isn't people going to their ancestors' grave, if truly those are the ancestors, right? I mean, these people are telling us that what they find most disrespectful is not people going to their ancestors' grave to mess with their ancestors' remains, but the fact that Black people played or are being portrayed as their ancestors. I don't know, the dynamics, I'm just like, wow. But one thing is for sure though, this entire situation reveals a lot. I mean, a lot that we already know, but it's one thing for you to know, it's another thing for them to say it out loud, right? Because when you look at this entire situation, historically, ancient Egyptians have been portrayed in movies by white people. And Egyptians did not have any problem with it. They did not see anything wrong or clamor, complaints. That's a controversy talking about how they are misrepresenting their history, right? But now, 2023, Netflix makes one docu-series portraying Cleopatra, a Greek, by the way, Greek, emphasis on Greek because we'll be coming back to that fact. Netflix makes one docu-series.
I mean, I like that. I'm going to stop it now because I've been playing it for a long time and I don't want to get demonetized for stealing someone else's content. So let's keep it moving. I want to show you another one because this one.
Egyptology news now in the Times, Leo. And finally, Beyonce and Rihanna are in the frame for news now in the Times.
I'm bringing this one back. Now, obviously, there's a bit of satire because these are comedians, but also I want you to kind of feel, this is obviously where I'm from. This is the UK. And I want you to kind of feel the sentiment behind this video, the smugness, because this is quintessential English R-wordism. Okay, this is kind of like the passive aggressive nature that they have towards people of melanated skin. So anyway, have a look here.
Egyptology news now in the Times, Leo. And finally, Beyonce and Rihanna are in the frame for cultural appropriation.
So you see there straight away, they've made it, finally, Beyonce and Rihanna are in the frame for cultural appropriation. Why is that funny? Why is that funny? Because obviously the joke being made here is they're Black and they're being told now that they're appropriating culture, even though cultural appropriation is clearly not what it is. Already had that discussion. It's definitely not cultural appropriation. But they find it very hilarious because it's like, oh, you're getting your comeuppance now, you Blacks.
So Egypt bans archaeologists for showing Beyonce as ancient Queen Nefertiti. So the Egyptian officials have banned Dutch archaeologists from the country in a bitter dispute over a museum exhibition that portrays black American singers, performers and musicians as the rulers of ancient Egypt. It's in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities. It's an exhibition entitled Kemet, which means the Black Land, which I don't know if you've been to Egypt, but it's not sub-Saharan Africa.
Did you hear that statement? Look at this guy. Look how serious his face is. Well, these guys are supposed to be like comedians, but look at him. I don't know if you've been to Egypt, but it's not sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa. Like, what the heck? Where did that come from? Literally, where did that come from? I don't know if you've been to Egypt. It's not sub. Well, first of all, Egypt has a lot of people who would be classified as quote-unquote sub-Saharan African. So the fact that he said, I don't know if you've been to Egypt, but it's not sub-Saharan Africa. Well, explain the people with sub-Saharan African phenotype, even though you use that stupid word. So what you're seeing here is a typical example of kind of like, what's the word? Rhetoric. This is what you call typical British rhetoric. I was going to say English, but I think this guy's Scottish. The other guy's English, I think. This is typical British rhetoric, you know, underlying tones of racism. Oh, it's not sub-Saharan Africa. Where did that come from? Anyway, let's move on.
You know where that comes from, because I read soil. It's the colour of the silt. The Nile floodplain basically turns the soil black, and that's why it's so enriched with nutrients. That's why.
Well, here we go. So here we go. Here's the comedian now has turned into an archaeologist. Well, what it is, Kemet. You know, they talk about Kemet quite a lot, and Kemet is actually the silt. It's the way the soil is enriched with nutrients and has nothing to do with... It's like he's been studying on these kind of like websites to come and finally throw that out there. Don't come to me with your Kemet nonsense. I know what Kemet means. It means the black soil. Well, if we want to do a little bit of terminology and kind of etymology of the word Kemet. First of all, I'm not a person who espouses on Kemet meaning the black land, as in land of the black people. I don't really touch on that because I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to what it means. But I will tell you this. The word Kem, that forms black, or the black part of the word Kemet, is the same as the word, or has its etymological roots in the word Ham. So if you know anything about the ancient Egyptian language, the K and the H are often interchangeable in that they pronounce a lot of words with the K that are now pronounced with the H, or were previously pronounced with the H. Okay, so this is why you got names like Sahure, which exist now in other parts of Africa as Sakure or Sakare. Okay, Kem and Ham are the same. Now, Ham was a person. So this is where it gets more interesting. Ham is denoting of a people. Okay, so it's always been kind of like historically known that the descendants of Ham or Kem, okay, were the people who were of the African continent. So you have Kem or Ham being used to denote a people prior to it being used to denote a colour. So that's when the debate comes in, which one came first. Now, once again, I'm not saying that it doesn't mean the black soil, but I'm saying that there certainly is an argument to suggest that it was to suggest that these are the people of Ham, as opposed to strictly saying that this is Kemet, the land where the soil is black. This is something that has not been conclusively argued either way. So, you know, that's just something to throw out there for you. I know someone just said Kem came before Ham. I know Kem came before biblical Ham, but I also think biblical Ham was a borrowed concept that existed prior to our knowledge of kind of what Ham is. That's where that came from. So obviously I know biblical Ham came in the New Kingdom and Kem is much older. The word Kem is much older, but I believe the concept of Ham, or concept of the people of Ham, actually, it wouldn't be a so someone just said that it's the glottal KH, like you clear in your throat. That would be the kind of Cushitic/Arabic pronunciation, but there are other parts of Africa where that wouldn't be the pronunciation, but you're absolutely spot on there as well. But it's very interesting. Anyway, that's too much of a side note, but I just thought I'd throw that out there because he said that with so much authority about Kemet being the soil. Let's listen to these clowns.
That's why it's called the Black Land. It's
don't ruin colour. My biased interpretation.
It's also a very good board game, Kemet. Anybody?
So we've seen this a lot, the erasure of an African minority, which is what, you know, Egyptian people are, the Bedouin and all the rest of it. And
he just said, we've seen this a lot, the erasure of an African minority. So he's now accusing black Americans of erasing Egyptians. Can you believe the gall of this Brit telling black Americans that they're trying to erase any minority, let alone an Egyptian minority? It's just, the mind beggars belief. The absolute audacity. But this is what you have to understand. This is very much the colonial mindset. You have to be clear. This is very much the colonial mindset. The thing about the colony, well, the kind of colony masters, I say the British, when you meet them, and I know I've ranted about this before, but the thing about the British is that they don't only not want to apologize for colonialism and slavery and the various genocides they've committed globally. They actually want to be thanked for them. Okay, so if you're not willing to actually thank the British, they will go about thanking themselves. So you'll know that if you're anyway kind of like touched by the kind of like the British education system, one of the favorite subjects that British teachers like to teach is Black history. They love it because they spend the whole time basically justifying British contribution. They'll turn around and they'll tell you, well, British were responsible for ending slavery. You know, without us, slavery would have remained for centuries and centuries. We found those uncivilized barbarian Africans and we traded with them. And then when it got too bad, we ended slavery and we allowed them their independence. And you should be thanking us for what we've done to this world. That is very much the kind of, that's the mindset. That is very much the mindset over here in the UK. They are very unashamedly like this. So the fact that this guy has turned around and his input was, the erasure of an African culture by black people, the mind boggles. But anyway, let's listen.
They're being replaced in, most recently there's that Netflix drama about Cleopatra where, you'd think she's from Nigeria or something instead of Egypt. In reality, Cleopatra was
so he just said that the Netflix actress, you'd think that she was from Nigeria. Yeah? One second. So Adele James. He thinks that Adele James is kind of a typical looking Nigerian. Now, don't get me wrong. She could be from Nigeria because we're obviously very, very, phenotypically diverse, like I always touch on. But Adele James is quite clearly not someone who this is the same guy who just said literally 1 minute ago, is not sub-Saharan Africa. And now he's saying, you'd think she's from Nigeria. Something says that this guy has got an issue with black people. I don't know. I just kind of like getting that little gist that this guy doesn't like blacks very much. Anyway, let's move on.
Macedonian.
It does seem, well, that's right, yeah. It does seem that there's not just like race swapping and stuff, but there are certain particular favoured minorities whom Hollywood and the music industry and so on want to kind of elevate in these places.
Yeah.
And I do understand the Egyptian, because Egypt is unique. It was this extraordinary civilization long before ancient Greece, let alone ancient Rome,
I'm going to rewind what they just said there because the audacity of it. Sorry.
Because Egypt is unique. It was this extraordinary civilization with minorities whom Hollywood and the music industry and so on.
So favoured minorities. So now, because of some crummy documentary on Netflix, yeah, And because Beyonce dressed up during some gala as Nefertiti, we're now a favored minority who can just, basically we can just do what we want. Yeah, black people, we're favored. Whereas white people, guys who look like this guy, have been appropriating every single civilization on the planet for the past 200 years unabated. English people have played, white English people who look like this guy have played the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Persians, unabated. No one has done anything to stop these people. They've made a movie presenting themselves as every single, even the Last Samurai, for God's sake, as every single ancient culture has been presented as the white English phenotype. And yet he's turning around and he's saying, black people are our favored. We kind of get away with everything. Like, are you kidding me? This is like gaslighting of the beyond. Like, come on, this is insane what these people are saying.
And want to kind of elevate in these places.
Yeah.
And I do understand the Egyptian, because Egypt is unique. It was this extraordinary.
I do understand the Egyptians. Of course you do. You're going to understand anything that's going to, hold, possibly elevate or, create a question mark around the version of history that you like.
Civilization long before ancient Greece, let alone ancient Rome, So there is a real kind of prize to be won here, I suppose, isn't there, by a people?
Well, it's arguably for the Egyptians, they consider it cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
They love this. I mean, arguably for the Egyptians, they call it cultural appropriation, isn't it? Because black people are appropriating the culture of who? For last time I saw, I didn't see black people, trying to be Arabs. Okay, there's no Arabic cultural appropriation taking place, and all due respect, we're talking about a sprinkling of musicians here. How many musicians are actually in that actual exhibition? We're talking about 10 to 20 musicians in that exhibition. So now they represent us, black people, as a culture appropriating Egypt, but the entire youth, the entire popular culture that permeates every single race in the Western world, the entire popular culture. By the way, popular culture is just, a acceptable term for black culture. There's no such thing as popular culture. It's black culture. Let's be totally real. Okay. So the entire popular culture, i.e. black culture, which permeates every single culture in the UK, white, Asian, whatever it is, K-pop, all of this stuff, all derivatives of black culture. That's true cultural appropriation. But 20 artists saying, I appreciate and I'm inspired by an ancient African civilization, now you're going to say that's true cultural appropriation. It's a bizarre perspective, isn't it? It's a really bizarre perspective.
Upset
Genuinely
and offended, and possibly rightly so. And of course there are parts of black America who want to appropriate that culture because, as you say, it's an ancient civilization.
Who want to appropriate that culture. It's so funny how they use this term, which doesn't even protect black people, let's be totally honest with you, from Europeans and Asians stealing our culture. We have this term. It doesn't even do a very good job of protecting us, but at least it allows us to define what's taken place when literally we can't understand why everything that we've built up and we've created is literally been dispersed amongst the world and we get no credit for it. Okay. So we got this term, cultural appropriation, which doesn't even protect us, and they're so happy to use it against us. They'll keep repeating it over and over again until it becomes a thing.
information that they can then...
I'll tell you who does look exactly like Nefertiti, though, is Dylan Mulvaney, funnily enough, with his strange long neck.
Don't give them ideas, Simon.
Have you been watching him on the train?
Yeah, so that was that one.
Joining us now is...
I don't want to watch any of that rubbish. Titanic. Who's been catching that nonsense? Anyway, sorry, let me not go into that one.
Outrage over a new exhibition in the Dutch...
I can't do this one. I was going to show you guys this video, but I can't do it. This guy he offends me too much.
A modern project in Cairo.
So a Nazi-inspired King Tut sculpture sparks race debate at a European museum. Hey, what's up? I'm A-Dub, and check this out. So according to reports, the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities recently opened an exhibit called Kemet, Egypt and Hip Hop, Jazz, Soul and Funk, which examines the connection between Egyptian culture and black music. But what got folks riled up was the David Cortez's statue, I Am Hip Hop, inspired by Nas's famous album cover, I Am, where the National Museum of Antiquities recently opened an exhibit called Kemet, Egypt and Hip Hop, Jazz, Soul and Funk, which examines the connection between Egyptian culture and black music. But what got folks riled up was the David Cortez's statue, I Am Hip Hop, inspired by Nas's famous album cover, I Am, where
that statue is so banging.
He appears as King Tut. Following the exhibit's debut, an Egyptian antiquities expert blasted the museum, claiming that it made a grave mistake by insulting Egyptian civilization by portraying King Tut as black. The museum also received an onslaught of negative comments on social media. The director of the museum has defended the exhibit following complaints in a recent statement. The exhibition does not claim that ancient Egyptians were black, but explores music by black artists who refer to ancient Egypt and Nubia in their work, music videos, covers of record albums, photos, and contemporary artworks. This music often reflects on the black experience in the West and tells stories about the African diaspora in pre-colonial Africa, including ancient Egypt. The exhibition explains that the representations of ancient Egypt are imaginaries, artistic interpretations of ancient Egypt, not realistic images of ancient Egypt, not realistic images of ancient Egyptians, artistic that the representations of ancient pre-colonial Africa reflects on the black experience in the West.
Okay, the music often reflects on the black experience in the West and tells stories about the African diaspora and pre-colonial Africa, including ancient Egypt. It's really important to understand that. Okay, so our music reflects the fact that pre-colonial Africa does include ancient Egypt. It is a part of pre-colonial Africa, whether or not people like it. Even it's quite interesting actually. How about this? Yeah. The naming of nations is actually something that's really quite interesting, because let's say when Africa had been carved up and they did the Berlin Conference, let's say they just gave Egypt a different name. Let's say they combined the nation of Libya and Egypt and just called that area Libya. Would we even be having this discussion right now? Would the current Egyptians be calling themselves Egyptians, or would they be fighting for Libyan culture and Carthaginian culture? You know, it's something that I ponder quite a lot. You know, it's like Abyssinia became Ethiopia. But Ethiopia used to be the name for the African, well, for a large part of the African continent, or for black people as a whole. What if Abyssinia had kept its original name? What would be our perception on Ethiopia? It's really interesting. I do ponder about these things because if, you know, like I said, if let's say they'd renamed Egypt, or the region, that's currently Egypt, they'd renamed that Libya and joined it with the Libyan nation, would those people even have any pride in the Egyptian culture? Or would they be trying to get rid of it or disassociate from it? You know, what if they had called Sudan Egypt instead? It's weird. It's just names. Do you understand? It's like it's how that actually reflects on people's behavior is I was just thinking about this the other day, just how much of an effect it had on our psyche, the way they've preserved or changed or moved names. And they did it on a whim. So it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. I don't know. It's just the interesting thought to think about, because a lot of this pride just comes from the fact that you reside in a nation that is called Egypt, not because you feel connected to the people that are there. So, anyway, side note.
West and tells stories about the African diaspora in pre-colonial Africa, including ancient Egypt. The exhibition explains that the representations of ancient Egypt are imaginaries, artistic interpretations of ancient Egypt, not realistic images of ancient Egyptians. For example, the exhibition contains a modern sculpture that represents the musician Nas, modeled after the mask of King Tut. The exhibition explains that it is contemporary artwork, not a replica. The exhibition explains why and when it was made and clarifies that it is not an ancient Egyptian artifact. But let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell to stay up to date on all of our new videos. And as always, make sure to keep it all the way locked to hiphopdx.com.
I thought that one was clean. I actually really enjoyed that. Just kind of seeing how they created that Nas statue was really cool. One more to watch. I think I'll watch this one mostly. I haven't got that, but yeah, let's watch this one, because this one actually was quite interesting. It's going to be the last one, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
A modern project in Cairo means an ancient Islamic cemetery, a UNESCO World Heritage Site no less, is being destroyed to make way for new roads and bridges. Well, Nirvana Mahmoud is an independent analyst and host of This Week in Egypt, the podcast. She joins us now. Nirvana, great to have you with us. Let's start with this Dutch exhibition then. Why exactly are the Egyptian authorities so upset about this? Isn't it flattering that some of the world's biggest stars like Rihanna and Beyonce are drawing their inspiration from ancient Egypt?
Isn't it flattering that they're drawing their inspiration from ancient Egypt? That's actually an honestly phrased question, even though I feel like she has ulterior motives. But that's what it is. They're drawing inspiration from ancient Egypt. Why would anyone take any umbrage to that? Let's listen to her response.
Thanks, Laura. There is a big difference between inspiration and cultural and historical plagiarism.
Cultural and historical plagiarism. Historical plagiarism. I don't think I've ever. What the hell is that? Cultural and okay.
Egypt is delighted and honored that it is an inspiration for the world. But let me put it in comparison. I
love that. See the way she said that. Egypt is delighted. It's an inspiration for the world. But she pointed at herself when she said Egypt. Did you notice that? So she thinks she represents Egypt. I decide who Egypt is. I decide what Egypt is. No, you just reside in a nation called Egypt. You play no part in the fact that people take inspiration from the Kemetic culture. You play no part in that. You have no decision making when it comes to that.
Have a dream catcher and a sag stick in my house. That doesn't mean that I have native Indian origin.
Okay, so this is where they're going now. Okay, it doesn't mean I have native Indian origin, but a lot of these people aren't even making the claim that they originate from ancient Egypt. That whole argument is a total straw man that is being created. Oh, you're not from here. Okay, so what? I say that all the time. I'm African. Listen, I could draw links to ancient Kemet, but I have no interest in doing that. Okay, I'm happy with where I'm from. I'm an African, and I'm just sharing the fact that ancient Egyptians were also black Africans like me. It doesn't mean I share a culture. So you making the analogy, oh, I have a shaman stick or whatever, it doesn't mean that I'm a Native American. Okay, well, can you prove? Did Beyonce say that she's an ancient Egyptian? Or are you just making that argument to try and sound clever?
Or culture, there is a subtle difference between the two. Egyptians understand that they inspire the world, but they reject identity.
No. Egyptians understand that they inspire the world. No, you don't inspire the world. And this is where I'm going to have to be quite rude and quite brutal. No one is inspired by modern Egyptians. I'm not saying no one, but I'm saying none of this discussion is around people trying to be like you. That would be cultural appropriation. So if people were like, oh, I really want to be like an Egyptian, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get I'm going to wear a hijab, okay? And I'm going to, bleach my skin and do this and do that. And I'm going to try my best to look like an Egyptian woman. I want to live the real modern Egyptian experience. Then you're spot on. Yeah, I'm with you. We're culturally appropriating you. People wanting to be like the ancient Egyptians of thousands of years ago who were an African culture has got nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. So please, that whole line of, people want to be like us Egyptians. No, they don't. No, they don't. No one wants to be like. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I'm sure you're a very lovely person. I'm sure, and I know many Egyptians. I'm friends with many Egyptians, and they are absolutely fine and nothing like you, thank God. But no one's trying to be like you. So wind your neck in, darling. In all due respect. JD, thank you very much for that generous donation. I really appreciate £10. Thanks very much, man. Good show. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Indian origin or culture, there is a subtle difference between the two. Egyptians understand that they inspire the world, but they reject identity theft. When saying that an ancient Egyptian culture...
It's not identity theft because it's not your identity. You don't carry any of the ancient Egyptian culture. You can't even pull off the ancient Egyptian hairstyles because they're African hairstyles. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but come on.
Is a black culture. When you see in social media people taking photos from temples, Egyptian temples, and make the color darker by software and saying it's a proof that ancient Egyptian culture is a black one, this is what we reject, not just the authority.
So she's angry at a few people who apparently go to temples, then put their images in Photoshop, darken the image, and say ancient Egypt was a black culture. That's what a whole gripe is. So you're angry with tourists who give your nation money, who visit your temples, and in your view, some of them Photoshop the images darker. I've never seen that, but I'll take your word for it. That's what this is about. That's what caused you to ban people from a museum from being able to excavate in Egypt, because a few black people will come to the country and using Photoshop. Is that the extent of your argument? Like what? Anyway.
But the vast majority of Egyptians.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because I think the term cultural appropriation...
There we go. Listen to the British girl. It's ironic, isn't it? Because, cultural appropriation. There we go. They're going to throw that one around there. They're going to throw that... I'm telling you, this cultural they're going to ride this wave until the wheels... I'm telling you, they're going to ride till the wheels fall off. They love saying cultural appropriation to black people because they know that they've spent literally the past... I would say 30 years and a lot past two centuries, but let's just say, conservatively, it's been the past 30 years very actively culturally appropriating black people and not having any word of defense, just kind of pretending it's not going on. And now they have this is like their first opportunity ever to say black people are actually taking some cultural cues from another nation. That's never happened before. It's kind of like the levels of excitement you can hear in these English people's voice when they say cultural appropriations, because this is the first time they've been able to say it. Because normally we don't copy nobody, but hey, they seem to like Egypt, and even though they're not actually leaving their house wearing pharaoh's hats, or listening to ancient Egyptian music or doing any of that stuff, we could kind of use this whole cultural appropriation thing against them. It's kind of the same. Yeah, it's the same enough. Yeah. They're cultural appropriating.
came from the United States, but here we see a very good example of it. When, Nirvana, did this mischaracterization of history start? Is it a modern phenomenon? Is it unique to the United States?
When did the mischaracterization of history start, said the English woman. You can't write this stuff. When did the mischaracterization of history start, said the English woman to the Egyptian? You could start a joke that way, couldn't you? Sounds like the start of a punchline. You're waiting for the punchline, isn't it? Are you kidding me? The mischaracterization of history. When did it start? I'd say it started when you colonized the world and you blew up the sides of the pyramids, yeah? And when I say you, I mean the English. Yeah, I'd say that's a healthy starting point for when the mischaracterization of, or maybe it was when Elizabeth Taylor was playing Cleopatra and the other actor was playing Ben-Hur and some other white person played Jesus. Or maybe we could go back a few hundred years and you got that Borgia or whatever his name is, who was the Jesus on became the Jesus in all of the Roman Catholic churches. When did the mischaracterization of history start? I can't believe she actually, so it starts now. The mischaracterization of history starts with Afrocentrism. Can you believe the nerve? Thank you. With Napoleon, when he saw Kemet and got jealous and said, history is nothing but a fable agreed upon. Come on. Oh my goodness me, these people have got no standards. Let's go.
Well, since the 18th century, funny enough, when the Western colonization spread in the Middle East and many showed interest in ancient Egyptian cultures and civilization, at that time they were interested of importing statues, obelisks from Egypt and planted in all the Western capitals or many Western capitals. Now,
did you stop them? When they came and they took all of Egypt's antiquity, did anyone attempt to stop them? Was there any resistance? Was there any of this? Interesting.
Now the Black American are taking a different twist and they are telling the Egyptian directly or indirectly, you either accept Egypt as a black culture or you are racist.
I'm saying that. I'm going to echo that. Yeah. I'm going to echo that. You either accept ancient Egypt was a melanated African culture, largely, I'm going to use the word largely to be diplomatic, or yes, you probably are racist because you're probably blind to the fact that melanated people are all around you and the statues of melanated people, and every single ancient historian who was contemporaneous with the Egyptians described them just like other Africans. I don't need to go through all the names. And all of their skulls are dolichocephalic and cluster with Africans. Their autosomal DNA clusters with Africans. And their limb proportions are supertropical. But let's ignore all of that. Let's pretend they don't have African limbs. They don't have African skulls. They don't have African DNA. They didn't represent African culture. And let's say that to you, we're not allowed to tell you, we're not allowed to mention the fact that they were probably an African people. No, I think I'll stick to my one, which is you're probably racist. That makes a little bit more sense to me,
Although racism exists in Egypt like all other countries, but in general, we are not a racist country.
I can't believe she just said that. Racism exists in Egypt like all other countries, but we're not a racist country. Egypt's a very racist country, I'm afraid. It really is. That's just a fact. And I say that firsthand from the many Nubian friends that I have. It's viral. It's disgustingly racist the way melanated people are treated in Egypt. And actually, you get this in a lot of you get this kind of mistreatment of darker skinned people. And I don't want to say this, I don't want to kind of like, I don't want to create any kind of tension or say anything, because I do love my, you know, my Islamic brothers and sisters, but you get it a lot in Islamic nations in Africa. Their Islamic nations tend to have colorism that's based on kind of an Arabic kind of like caste system, which wasn't created by, you know, I'm not going to suggest that it's something that's been created, but I think it comes from this whole idea of everything aspirational being in that part of the world, and therefore it kind of creates this kind of subconscious caste system. And you get it a lot, particularly in Islamic nations. You get this strong colorism, particularly in most of the African Islamic nations. So Egypt's just kind of one of them. It's not the only one. There's a lot of them that have exactly the same problem, where the fairer skin will get better treatment. But for her to say Egypt's not a racist nation with a straight face is actually quite despicable.
We are a multifaceted country with 7,000 years of civilization that many contributed to it, and we reject to narrow it into only black culture. Africa.
No, but that's the issue. Your thing is not that it's being narrowed to only black culture, because no one, particularly in that Dutch exhibit, is making that suggestion. I mean, I'll make that suggestion, but I could have that discussion with you face to face. But the Dutch aren't making that suggestion, and certainly those artists who you're kind of singling out, they certainly aren't making that suggestion. You're actually angry that any association, just like most Egyptians, like Bassem Youssef and like the other Egyptians, you're angry of any association. So you're making this thing like, oh, it's a multicultural, wonderful society, Egypt's not racist, blah, 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 blah. But every time you see a black face, you get vexed. Every single time you see a black face, you get vexed. Anytime you see a black person, it's my reconstructions. I haven't reconstructed every single pharaoh. I've done like 6 or 7. And every single video that I've reconstructed any pharaohs, regardless of how accurate my reconstructions are, as melanated or black people, Egyptians are the first people on there telling me they weren't black. So don't come on here with your high horse nonsense talking about, we're a multicultural nation and we're cool. You don't want any association with Africans. So, there you go.
Africa is a continent, not a color.
And a lot of Egyptians are really upset about this, aren't they, Nirvana? We have seen a real outpouring of anger online. So people are upset about that on one hand, but at the same time today, an ancient Islamic cemetery is being bulldozed in Cairo. Why aren't Egyptians concerned about preserving this piece of history?
Well, actually, a lot of Egyptians, myself included, are concerned. My mother is buried in the same cemetery. All her family is buried are buried in the same cemetery. It evoked a lot of emotional, personal for me and for many, many Egyptians who have relatives buried in this cemetery. It's not about just the big flashy historical name. It's about ordinary Egyptian. And there is an outrage, but there is a distinction between identity and between the lack of, we need to modernize. Let's acknowledge that this cemetery existed when it was desert, when Cairo wasn't as huge as now. Now the cemetery is in the heart of Cairo. And from some perspective, some people say we need to modernize the country. We are overpopulated, congested Cairo. We have to do some modern solution for it. And the cemetery is stopping that. I want to compare it with when Egypt built the high dam in the 60s.
Of course you would. I knew she was going to go there. I knew she was like, so it's comparable to when we built the high dam. Oh yeah, it's easy for you to say because you're not Nubian. Your home and your culture wasn't destroyed and flooded. For her to just kind of like whimsically and just like, throw it, it wasn't necessary for our development to build this high dam, shows you how racially insensitive this woman is, because she clearly has no idea the lives that people that are still suffering, the lives that were destroyed as a result of the building of the high dam.
It affected Abu Simbel temple, and then at that time there was an outcry and there was a lot of effort to save the temple. And from your channel, I appeal to the world to help Egyptian who are now, the authority, I believe they are reconsidering and they are looking for solution. And if there is a lot of facilities, I'm sure we can reach some creative solution who save the cemetery or at least part of it, and on the same time modernize the city as it should be.
Yeah, difficult decisions in Egypt, but as you say, Cairo is a city with a very rich history, but it is also a city where many people have to live. Fascinating, Nirvana. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. Nirvana Mahmood there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there you go. That was something, wasn't it? Goodness me. I think that's it. Oh my God, it's midnight. I started the stream at 10 o'clock. That was much longer than I intended.
Joining us now is
gosh,
Michael Guillen, a scientist, journalist.
Definitely don't want to do anymore. All right, so I'm going to call it a day because it's late and I'm tired. And that was fun. At least I hope so. Thank you very much for joining me, guys. We've got 300 people online right now. 1,600 views and 284 likes. I think there's a bit of a mismatch going on there. But thank you so much, people who generously gave as well. I'm flattered and just kind of overwhelmed by your generosity. I want to make sure I got everyone here. So JD, thank you very much. You smashed it. Oh, Quest, Tepenra, I'm so sorry I actually missed you, man. It said, Peace King, I can't even take no more. They can't handle the truth. Is absolutely right. Thank you so much for the $10, man. Bless you, bro. Really appreciate that. And there were two more, but I've lost them in the upper parts of the chat. But I think I did catch the people who gave before you guys. So I really appreciate it. Hit those likes up before you go. And yeah, man, I'll catch you on the next one. That's two lives in 2 days. Not bad, not bad. Quite happy about that. Thanks, guys. My pleasure, Vorleo. My absolute pleasure. It's been really enjoyable being online with you guys. Lots of engagement in this one, so yeah. It's much easier than me recording this and having to edit it. That takes ages. So thanks, guys. All the best. See you soon. Desaline, you told me to wait, bro. What's going on? I'm hovering over the end stream button. Thanks, guys. I appreciate everything. I'm going to end the stream now.